Hey, my friend, have you ever wondered how you could measure and track your body just a little bit more so you could see what your body's doing on the inside without going to a doctor? Today, I want to introduce you to this whole world of self-quantification, which is how do you measure your body a bit more by yourself? And my guest is an expert at this stuff, and he's been measuring everything about his body for years and years. But don't worry, we're going to talk about the basics and then a little bit more of the advanced techniques that you can start to measure by yourself so you can live a long and healthy life and look good in the process. All right, let's get right into it. If you're enjoying the show, please hit subscribe on the channel below and also hit the like button. That ultimately helps new people find this channel and the show and also get benefit from all these amazing guests that we have on the show. Hello, my guest today is Bob Troia, who's a New York City-based technology entrepreneur, biohacker, and self-quantification geek focused on the intersection of data-driven citizen science, health and wellness, human performance, longevity, and personal optimization. That's a lot of things. And Bob goes by the handle Quantified Bob, which really means that he tracks his entire life tirelessly. And he's got so much data and insights that I can't wait to dig into. So Bob, thank you very much for coming on the Anti-Aging Hack Show.
Thanks for having me on.
So let's get into this. You're a self-optimization nerd and a badass, and you got into this journey in, I believe, 2012. What got you started into this journey of self-quantification?
Well, it actually goes back much farther, back into even to like high school and university. Like I was an athlete, and before we had all the tools and technologies we have today, we were tracking things for performance, for athletics. What's going to get me tracking workouts and getting a better performance or get, faster or jump higher. And so we were doing stuff with very simple tools back then. And I was always just a curious individual. I mean, I have a technology background. I was always a tinkerer. And it's just one of those things where over the last decade, the tools have emerged and that have given us the ability to really understand a lot more about ourselves. And it was around 2011, 2012 where this concept of quantified self emerged. It was coined by the founder of Wired magazine, and there was a small group of people in the Bay Area that would get together for some meetups and just have these informal show and tells where they would share like, hey, I did this experiment, and it wasn't necessarily about their bodies or anything. It's just something about understanding themselves better and getting some insight. And from there, it really expanded. And then you had this overlay a few years later of biohacking, which was essentially looking at things from using science and data and technology for people really trying to improve their biology and their minds. But there is a bit of an overlap there. But quantified self stuff is really where that kind of came out first in terms of self-awareness. And I really was surprised when I first encountered this community of quantified self people, because I was doing a lot of these things already, and just to find a group of like-minded individuals was really exciting. And people were showing off this data. It was very cooperative, collaborative. People were inspiring each other, and the early days were just really taking some of these basic tools and wearables and saying, let's see what happens if I put on these devices and I go do something. It could be exercise, it could be just sitting and watching a movie, and really, you're just trying to uncover things about yourself. And then we started understanding like, oh, well, now we have access to tools like lab testing and other diagnostics that will allow us to now look inside ourselves even further. And the science was still really new and raw on a lot of these things because we're just taking things out of the lab and bringing it to consumers. And so it's really just been a journey over the past decade of just constantly learning more about yourselves. You might have some theories or belief systems, and you have to sort of be willing to shift that, because there may be something around diet that you were like, this is the way I'm going with diet. And then you changed it up and you got these great results. But then 5 years later, you realize, well, I should still tweak it a bit more. There's it's not one size fits all. Let's figure out how I can even optimize this. Especially if someone, when you're in your 20s versus when you're in your 40s, I think you have to look at that as well. I mean, are you optimizing for performance, longevity? Are you just saying, I want to strike a balance between the two? So, and that's what everyone has to kind of figure out for themselves. And so for me, because I have a technology background, I've always been into understanding like, hey, if I can look at this data and gain some insights out of it and apply it to myself. It's kind of, some people say it's extreme, but it's something that I've been doing over years. So I built these layers of, a lot of it's sort of passively collected data. So it's not like a chore for me to, I mean, I've put in time over the years, but now it's kind of set it and forget it for a lot of things, unless I'm constructing specific experiments, and happy to share some of those as well. But I think for anyone, you could start very simple. Don't get overwhelmed by data. I mean, that's the biggest problem people have. They buy a million devices and tools, and they're like, I'm going to track everything. And then they got this pile of data, and they're like, what do I do with it? It'll be like, oh, it tells me I sleep like crap, but I know that already. So what does that really, so you have to, just start simple with some of these basic tools, and then get some insights, and you can start, doing little experiments and then layer on top of it. So I think that's, for me, that's really been my journey. I didn't go into it all at once saying like, track everything. It's been very much a constant work in progress.
Yeah, so thank you for that. You've been doing this for years. So if somebody that's new, that's discovering you, is going to be like, oh my God, Quantified Bob is the guru of gurus, right? But if you go back to the time since you've been doing this, since the quantified self movement kind of started to take off and grow in popularity, you've certainly been in the spotlight quite a bit. You've been speaking at conferences. You have a beautiful website that's got a lot of data and the experiments that you're doing. How has your life changed since this movement kind of grew a little bit, Bob?
Well, my life's changed in that early on, I was uncovering, where someone might look good on the outside, let's say, or look healthy. I mean, I was an entrepreneur. I am an entrepreneur. I was running a company back when I started that I later sold, and everything was going great. I was playing in bands, I was playing sports, but inside I was like exhausted, worn out, and I was learning a lot about, well, what was going on under the hood, that was causing it. And through, when I started exploring through combining data with some lab testing, you start peeling, we call it, peeling back the layers of the onion. You start figuring out those root causes of what, was making you like basically going, I mean, the analogy I use is you feel like you're going through life with the parking brake on in your car, but you don't realize it. And then once you take that parking brake off, you're like, whoa, I could have been like this the whole time. And somehow, the fact that you were able to be a high performer with that parking brake on, and then you take that off, it's just like a whole nother world. So in terms of how my life has changed, for me, I'm just so much more in touch with my body in terms of, whether it's, I can feel when something's off or on. I know, whether it's like a, illness versus just exhaustion, maybe you're overtraining. You need a day off. Your diet wise, there might be, I don't adhere to like an extreme side of the dietary spectrum. I would put it kind of in that, definitely like a paleo-ish sort of diet, but there'll be a day where I'm just like, Bob needs to eat, refeed today. And like, I have no problem once a month eating like a big gluten-free pizza. It's like, I'm like, it's a one-time thing. It's not like my habit. And, but and then I'll there'll be times where I'm just like, no, I'm going to fast for 5 days. If I want to do it, I'll just do it. And, I like it as a reset. And so I think it's really just becoming better in touch kind of what's going on, in terms of my body, as well as mind, like whether it's emotional, just kind of where I'm at and headspace wise. I think, we go through life and we kind of think we're invincible, and we have to kind of, be able to kind of take that look inside and be able to go, okay, and even if things are going well, you can still be like, okay, could it be better? Maybe, yeah.
Absolutely. And this is great. Let's jump into it. You've touched on this a little bit. Quantification, self-quantification is great, and I'm all in favor of it. When I talk to other people about it, they're like, oh yeah, I can measure stuff, very cool. And they're happy for a second until you tell them you've got to measure this, this, and this. And suddenly their eyes glaze over. They're like, well, how much work do I have to do every day to track this? How much of this is automated versus how much am I entering data in spreadsheets? And of course, when you started, I'm sure it was all raw, man. There were no devices. There was no Oura Ring to kind of track your sleep automatically. So you had to learn the hard way. Now where we're at, how much of this, at least the basic quantification that most people should do, is automated versus still doing spreadsheets, in your opinion?
It just depends on how extreme you want to go. I mean, a lot of the tools, every type of device that's out there, whether you're talking about an Oura Ring or a Fitbit or some kind of wearable like that, or just something like a glucose meter, some of them are like, the data can come right out of it and go into an app or into some, cloud-based system, or you can put it into a spreadsheet. When I first started, it was, I still have notebooks from 25 years ago, where I wrote everything down, like from body weight to workouts to other stuff, things, supplements I was taking. It just depends like where you put that data and then what you want to do with it. Sometimes it's just a matter of recording that data so that you might just want to have a record of it. Not that you're going to act on it right away, but if you want to go back in time and you never reported it, especially with passively collected data, like if you have wearable data, what's nice is that I can go back and be like, well, what was going on, in 2005 and whatever, and you can kind of see at a glance, even though I, at the time probably wasn't doing much of that data. But I do think people can start, a spreadsheet is fine. I mean, especially if you're tracking just 1 or 2 data points. I mean, if you know how to do a spreadsheet, it's really simple. I mean, use date or timestamp, whatever you want, and some value. And then if you want to, some people like to make charts and graphs and all that, and that's fine. But some people have a little more, like they want to run statistical analysis or have tools that they can have that analyzed for them so that they can find these correlations, right? Because the challenge, especially with biohackers, are they're doing 20 things at once. Yes. And they can't isolate what is actually moving that needle, because maybe out of those 20 things, there's really just 2 or 3 things that are really doing it, and everything else is a waste of time and money. Or at least mostly, maybe they get 98% of the way there. And so, you can find different tools to do that. I don't think, I think if you stick to just a few devices, that all those device makers, their apps that they've got, their platforms will, they give you pretty good information there. Or if you want to take it out of there, both Apple and Android platforms have ways to pull data out. A lot of these apps will share the data into those systems so that you have more of a way to aggregate, so like if you've got multiple tools, because obviously no one device is going to know everything about you. And that's the challenge too. Is like, so like an Oura Ring or a wearable might say, they're just trying to estimate your recovery and your readiness, but it doesn't know that like you had a really rough day at work, or you had a fight with someone, or you're stressed out. Like it just doesn't know. Doesn't know if you meditated. It doesn't know and so that's been the challenge for a lot of people, is it's giving you insights based on what limited silos of data it has. And if someone's looking for guidance, it's obviously for like, saying, here's my data, tell me what to do, versus people and this has been more in the quantified self space, where people are saying, well, I'm going to go through the data and I'm not necessarily trying to prove a theory. I'm not trying to say like, my theory is that when I do this, this, and this, I get more deep sleep. It's more like, I'm going to sift through this data and see if anything surfaces, because it's more of a discovery, versus someone saying, the other way you can approach it would be, I have this issue, like, okay, I have high blood sugar. What can I do to control it? And that would be a case where you can set up experiments and see like what affects it.
Yeah, that's great points. Now, as we're getting better with technologies that are more passive, right? Like the Oura Ring that you just mentioned, it can track everything within its ecosystem pretty well, but there is no overarching platform that says, okay, give me the Oura Ring data and give me the Fitbit data and give me this, and I'll just create all these charts and graphs that you should look at, right? I think we're going to get there. I think Apple's trying to make a play, but they're so nascent when they compare the stuff you are doing, for example. Yeah, they're trying to do a lot of the stuff in their watch, but that's still years away. People were saying they're going to integrate sleep data into the new Apple Watch, but they couldn't make it in. And plus the charging ability, if you have to charge something every 18 hours or a day, that also makes it a little bit harder. Yeah, so sorry, let's get into the next thing. I want to get into some specifics, Bob, which is, let's talk about anti-aging and longevity and what people can do. And let's go into this, like the layers of the onion that you just talked about. So on the outside, what are some of the basic things that people can start measuring, tracking, biohacking, improving, in your opinion, that are going to have a good impact to how long they live and how healthy they live?
So, I mean, from a basic tracking standpoint, I do think an element of understanding, just evaluating your sleep and, different wearables. Again, I wouldn't look at how much deep REM and light, different stages of sleep. I don't think devices are like, people get like really worried about like, oh, I'm not getting enough deep. But I'm like, you slept for 8 hours last night. Like that's okay. If that's your goal, then you hit it. Like if you're pretty consistent, you go to sleep at the same time every night. I think you want to see those patterns and not get obsessed right away with the details about like, why am I getting no deep versus REM? And because like I said, I wear multiple devices when I sleep, and guess what? The time I fell asleep, the time I woke up are the same. Do I wake up? If I have disturbances, they will match up. But the amount of deep versus light versus REM, the stages you get are largely, they, I just, I'd say, they're maybe 50, 60% on at this point. There's just too many variables in the way different devices track it. That's not saying that those aren't good devices. I'm just saying like, I think they're great for understanding the basic sleep metrics. I think it's good to know because you can experiment with that. You can see if I go to bed a half hour earlier, later, you can kind of see like what minimizes disturbances. You might want to start playing around with tracking blood sugar. So you think of like, if someone has like type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes, they're monitoring their blood sugar, because it's literally like could be life or death. But now we've come into this concept of metabolic fitness and the idea of understanding our body wants to sort of maintain, you want tighter levels of blood sugar. You don't want it spiking around throughout the day. So a simple example would be to get a glucose meter that they cost maybe $30. It's an inexpensive one. And you have to prick your finger and take like a tiny drop of blood, and it goes on a strip that goes into the sensor, and it'll give you a number. And you can just you can do that anytime you want. Those strips are relatively inexpensive. And what it'll show you is just kind of where you are baseline, because like when you go for your checkup every year, they're gonna measure your blood sugar. Now that's one point in time at one day of the year at 1 hour. Well, we have circadian rhythms to our blood sugar. It's affected by things like stress and food and exercise. And so by having more data points, you'll really have a better sense of your baseline, because that second you went to the doctor, well, if your appointment was at 8 a.m. versus 10 a.m., you're going to have very different numbers, because in the morning we actually have a bit of a spike in our blood sugar after we awake, and then it comes back down again. So I do think, that would be an important metric to follow and monitor. When we talk about like longevity as a whole, I mean, there's some really low-tech things you can do to gauge where you're at. Like grip strength is a real simple metric, because there's been basically there's a device called a hand dynamometer. It has like a handle and a grip, and you squeeze it as hard as you can. There's like a little display on it that will say, how much force you generate by squeezing as hard as you can. And there's charts that they've mapped to different age ranges and all that. And so they actually find that, if someone as people get older, they lose grip strength. So by maintaining grip strength, the theory is that you'll be in a better place. The same way they measure people for things like gait and balance. Not that because your gait or balance is off means you're older. It means you're more at risk for falling and getting hurt and potentially having a really something bad happen. So those are, some other proxies. Then we get into, when we talk about measuring, this idea of biological age versus chronological age. There's a few methods that are pretty popular now, or getting popular. The first is telomere testing, where you probably talked about this before. It could be done through saliva or blood. And it's measuring essentially the ends of your strands of DNA. And as they divide, the telomeres shrink, and eventually the cells will die. And so you're comparing it against sample sizes and seeing like what your biological age is versus your chronological age. Another method is epigenetic testing. And now we're getting to this concept of something called the epigenetic clock. So there's a guy, Robert Horvath, at I think UCLA, who they found that by looking at DNA and methylation basically by looking at these things on your DNA, they can really, really accurately say, without even knowing the person, I could predict how old you are just by looking at that. And so they, and it's pretty accurate from the studies they've done. And now there's companies that are launching that will provide that testing, and you just spit into a tube and you mail it in, and then you get results. And then there's companies that are using more like biomarker-based testing. So they're going to say, okay, we're going to look at certain key factors of your blood. So it could be things like blood sugar and certain cholesterol markers. Inflammatory markers are really important. And they'll combine all of them into some calculation, and then it spits out like, well, okay, this is your chronological age, and then your biological age is this, and that's kind of a black box calculation. So it's a little weird in that, everybody has sort of different ways of doing it. And then I've even seen it where they've combined that biomarker testing with other. They're saying, well, you don't have a single biological age. You might have like, okay, your heart health is this, your skin health is this, your cardiovascular health. There's all these pieces of it that maybe together give you some number, but you might be like, hey, you're great in these 3 areas, but you got to watch out over here because you're aging much faster than normal in these areas. So, I'd say but for people just starting out, I mean, it's really just a matter of, I'd say things like blood sugar, understanding your sleep and stress. And, if you're going to go out and do some lab testing, some basic lab testing, I mean, even things like blood pressure, we have to look at things like hypertension. A lot of people are dealing with, you can buy a blood pressure cuff for home use, which I think is better than going to the doctor sometimes, because you're actually a little bit nervous when you go to the doctor, and it will be slightly elevated. I mean, with me, I know it's a good, 10 points higher when I go there, just versus when I'm sitting at home doing a test. And so, again, these are tools. The basic tools don't cost a whole lot of money, and you can start getting insights, and they don't even have to be that high tech, like in terms of connectivity or Bluetooth or whatever. It's like, blood pressure is 2 values. You can write those down to a spreadsheet. Glucose is 1 number. Write that down in a spreadsheet. If you go and get lab testing with some of those values, like in certain inflammatory markers, you can track those as well. So yeah, I think, for most people, they're just looking for that 1 number, right? It becomes more of a vanity metric. And that's the concern I have, is that they do these certain tests to get that 1 number. So they can go, if I graph my age over time, my chronological age will keep going up as I get older, but my biological age should be going down. But then figuring out what is contributing to that, that actual factor, and what changes can you make? So as long as you get that number and you kind of have a plan, like they're giving you some actionable steps with it, I think it's good. Otherwise, just seeing the number, yeah, you're going to spend some money for the cool test, but it's not giving you, it's not telling you how to improve it.
Yeah, no, 100%. Those are some great tips, by the way, Bob. Thank you for that. I have a couple of follow-on questions for some of these areas. You mentioned sleep, and I'm a light sleeper. I've had sleep issues in the past for a long time, and I've tried a lot of things. The basics, the sleep hygiene, whatnot. And then about a year and a half ago, I got the Oura Ring, so I started tracking that. What was most interesting and most surprising to me about getting a ring or a tracker was my restlessness, right? It's more important than, as you said, the REM or the deep. It's like, how many times are you tossing and turning? I'm like, gosh, that's a lot. And, I tried a few things to improve it. And then finally, just a little while ago, I realized 2 things about my sleep. Number 1, I have to be in bed for 9 to 9.5 hours to get a good amount of sleep because of my restlessness and waking up sometimes. Mm-hmm. And number 2, I started doing this so I would meditate before bed sometimes, and it would be okay. It wouldn't make a huge difference. But I started doing this brain FM meditation. And I am starting to believe that it's something to do with, the frequencies of sound that they're putting into your ears, which are not only just, because with basic meditation, you're kind of trying to breathe and your thoughts are running around. But if you also have sound frequencies going in, then that can calm your brain down to more of a meditative state, which gets you out of this firing synapses all the time, which maybe preps you better for sleep. So for me individually, right, this is different for everybody, but for me, I think that a combination of those 2 things is having results way more than the 20 things I tried before. So it's very interesting. Any other from your standpoint, interesting things you've learned as you've worked through your sleep and or helped other people with it?
Yeah, sleep, we spend, let's say, at least a third of our lives, right, in our bedroom. So how do you develop both the sleep hygiene around, what do you do to prepare before you go to sleep at night? And then how do you optimize the environment that you're sleeping in? And I've done a lot of different things to sort of really ensure and optimize that experience for myself. So, you hear a lot of talk about avoiding blue light at night, having routines, turning off electronic devices and stuff, maybe an hour or two before bed. So maybe read or do some other things. Like you mentioned, you listen to some binaural beats and some audio. Like that's kind of like getting you set for rest. But I think for me, in my bedroom environment, the really like comes down to the number two, well, I'll say the top three things. Like I like to be in a cold, dark environment. And so that can mean like I like the room really cold. The air is really cold, but I'm still under the covers. And depending on the time of year, so now if it gets into warmer months, I actually have something called a chiller pad on my bed. So it chills water and it pumps it through this little cushion that you sleep on top of. So actually, I think it's probably like in the 57 degrees Fahrenheit below me. So I'm in this cold room with a really cold pad under my back during the night, but I'm under a blanket, and that helps trap the cold air in. And my body, in terms of restlessness, I stay completely still. It's like I'm in a cold cave, right? Mm-hmm. Now the challenge there was there's a newer model of that device. I have the older one, so I can't program it to do different. Like the new ones, you can say, okay, go on for 3 hours and change the temperature. Mine's like on or off, and you set the temperature. So what I did was I just hooked it up to one of those outlet timers, so I can say like, okay, run this thing as cold as it can while I'm in bed until about 4 a.m. Because what ends up happening during sleep is we get all our deep sleep in the early parts of the evening, and then we sort of warm and we cool down. We start warming up again as we come to rising, and that's where you get all of the REM and other type stages. So I was like, well, let me experiment with that. And so I would just set the timer and be like, okay, let me turn it off at 4 so I don't wake up shivering, and I want to wake up warm. And that's been pretty great, especially in the summer months. Another thing I do, which probably freaks some people out, but it's not really that bad, is mouth taping. So I get this 3M micropore tape, and you basically just put a strip of it across your mouth, and you breathe through your nose all night. And I know a lot of people will say like, my nose is congested, I've got other issues. Yeah, I was the same way. I used to wake up every morning with like sinusitis and just be clogged. And it was because if you're breathing through your mouth, everything's drying out. You're not getting airflow through it. And actually, by forcing that breathing, you also create things like nitric oxide. Even during what's going on right now with like COVID and all that, you're hearing about things with like some of the benefits of the nitric oxide boost and all that is nasal breathing in general. So even if you're not sleeping, just in general, like breathing throughout the day when you're not talking, is beneficial. So mouth taping. I would say those are, temperature, mouth taping for me are really important. And then having that routine before bed. Just like I try to not rely on supplements for sleep. I feel like it's when you're in a bind, sure, maybe you travel, there could be something that requires it at a time. But when you have to rely on it all the time, then you're just covering up a problem. You're not fixing something. And so that's why I've got tools and stuff. Sure, there's things I can take, but I don't I'm not relying on that. I try to rely on, well, what can I do to control the environment to optimize my sleep? And that's, those have been the big three things. I mean, there's other techniques people experiment with, like one's called inclined bed therapy, where you raise the headboard side of your bed up about 6 inches. So the bed it's a very slight slope. I mean, you won't really notice it even if you're in the bed, but it's enough that from a lymphatic drainage and circulatory, it makes you have to pump fluids through your body. Now you're working against gravity a little more. And for me, it seems to be was a nice adjunct to the other things I was doing. But yeah, I mean, those are I'd say, some simple things you can do. I mean, get blackout curtains if you have a room that like gets a lot of light into it. So like I got these really inexpensive blackout curtains. I think I got them off Amazon. And when I go in the room, it's like pitch black, even in the daytime, unless I open the curtains, obviously. But it's great. It's been a nice boost for sleep.
Yeah, love all those tips, and I do pretty much all of them. I've got a chili pad. I have the old version too, so it's just one temperature.
Yep.
and I turn the AC on to about 67 degrees, 65 sometimes. But I don't go as cold as you, man. 55 is like, I would wake up shivering. And I think you've just got to build up to it a little bit. So I'm at like 67 on the chili pad. So yeah, so that works well. And then I tried the 3M tape for, I think it was a week, and I was doing it like hardcore style. So I was ripping it off in the morning without, putting any lubricant on my lips. And so after a week I got a zit. So I was like, oh man. So I got out of that, but maybe I need to get back and just like oil it a little bit before I put the tape on. But that's a very good technique as well, to force you to sleep through the nose. Now, the second thing let's go to is blood sugar. We talked about extremely important. Glycemic variability, extra glucose just does so much harm. It clogs up your proteins, it attacks your DNA. So the more we can get in control of our sugar in our bodies is going to be one of the best predictors of how long you live, in my opinion. And so, there's different tests you can do. There's automated monitors now that you can use. You can use the blood glucose monitors by pricking yourself. Super cheap, as you mentioned. There's a couple of devices out there. I think the Dexcom G6 is the newer one that is tracking you automatically. So you can kind of, in a span of a few weeks, you can figure out, well, how do I react to coconut oil? How do I react to running hard for 10 seconds? How do I react to a big old burrito that everybody loves to eat, or 4 slices of New York pizza? Right? So that's a good one as well. And then the one test that I love is the OGTT, which stands for the oral glucose tolerance test. And basically, in a fasted state, they pump you in. You have to go to a doctor for this, unfortunately, but they feed you just basically plain sugar into your blood, and they optimize, or they measure your response to that sugar in a fasted state, I think every 30 minutes or so. And then they give you a score of how well you're doing. And that's quite a good predictor of how quickly you can use the glucose in your oxygen. Have you done the OGTT? I'm sure you have.
Yeah, I've done it both, with doctors, but I can get you. Basically, I've done my own. I mean, you just you get the solution. It's just pure glucose solution, and there's it's measured out in a certain quantity. I use a different continuous glucose monitor called the Freestyle Libre that is pretty popular now. And so it just goes on the back of your arm and collects data every 15 minutes for 2 weeks. And so it's cool, as you can see what happens while you're sleeping, like you said, different foods. And so an oral glucose tolerance test, you basically just say, okay, let's get a baseline of my blood sugar. You chug this awful tasting pure sugar solution. And then I think depending on, I've seen different variants of it where some will measure you over like 2 hours or 3 hours. And the idea is you'll get a curve, right? So you're gonna consume all the sugar. You're gonna see your blood sugar is gonna go, whoosh. And now we want to see, how does the body deal with this excess of sugar and basically suck it up into the tissues, and then it should come back down. So like, I know for me, when just the way my body is with sugar, I don't crave sugar a ton and all that. So when I do one of these tests, it goes up, and then I go hypoglycemic. I actually dip, so my body overshoots the insulin, because it's just like, get this stuff out of here. It's like, do whatever you can to get this out of here. So eating a lot of sugar. So you hear about like people who like, blood sugar and crashing, right? It's like, because your blood sugar goes up and then you start going down, you actually go too low. And some people actually have that issue just overnight while they're sleeping. And that'll create disturbances as well. I learned that about myself when, depending on what I ate my dinner and the timing of dinner, my last meal of the day, you could actually have disruptions, because your body will just wake up, because that jolt of cortisol will bring your sugar back up. And but the oral glucose tolerance test is just a good way, especially if you're going to get into understanding how other foods affect your blood sugar. You kind of use the oral glucose tolerance test as like your baseline. You can say, okay, this is pure sugar. This is what happens. Now, what happens, like you said, whether it's coconut oil or I eat a banana or just a meal, right? Because it might not just be one item you're eating. You're eating, a combination of ingredients that can do something. And I've done things where I'd measure out, again, in equal amounts of different types of carbohydrates. And so I would do like some white rice. And I'd say, okay, what happens when I eat this bowl of white rice? And I said, well, what happens when I eat this white rice and I add a teaspoon of coconut oil? It actually has a different effect. And then there's things that will buffer the response. What happens if I go for a 5-minute walk before I eat this white rice, or after? It's like, so then you start understanding, like, it's all in context of, what are we eating? What are we eating it with? And then when are we eating it? Like, in terms of, like, am I eating around activity, time of day? And so you can do that's what's great about these continuous glucose monitors is you don't have to keep pricking your finger like 20 times a day. You can just collect the data and it's all there. And there's actually a few companies now that are marrying that sensor data with the meal stuff. And so you can basically it'll basically make it easier for you to track it, and they're doing proprietary services because these sensors require a prescription in the US still. But it is good to get those insights.
Yeah, that's great. I'd requested Dexcom G6 from my doctor many times, actually. He's a great doctor, well known. He's in magazines and stuff in Beverly Hills, but he just keeps telling me, don't do it. You're going to become a hypochondriac. You're going to start worrying. And I go, no, doc, I'm a biohacker. I just want to understand my body's response, as you said, to a different types of foods and different combinations. And maybe in a couple of months, I'll be good once I have my baseline. And I know that eating a banana is very bad for me because it's just straight spike, right? Or white rice by itself, or a big burrito. And then I can start to just be careful around those foods. I'm not going to go into some kind of scary state where I'm running away from food. I just know what to do. And I can take other interventions, like you said, take a walk before, take a walk immediately after, have some berberine or Ceylon cinnamon that can reduce your blood sugar spike after meals. So it's been interesting, and he finally wrote me a prescription, so I'm going to go get one. Yeah, it was a while. It took a while. Yeah.
But that is a big concern. Like a lot of people talk about self-quantification, being hypochondriac, and I don't know. I do like the way you were saying. I'm trying to learn things about myself, and if anything, like let's say you're tracking blood sugar, I want to know maybe there's certain foods that I'm like, go ahead, eat it. It's like, it's not going to, your body's cool with it. Don't freak out. And so I almost look at it as a way to uncover maybe it's something I like to eat. Maybe it's like that chocolate brownie, gluten-free brownie actually doesn't spike your blood sugar in a crazy way. So, go ahead, go crazy.
Yeah, that's winning. The other thing you talked about, which was very interesting to me, Bob, it shook my world last year, was grip strength. And the way I learned this is I participated in the BLSA, Baltimore Longitudinal Study on Aging, which is funded by the National Institute on Aging. It's in Baltimore. And I got into that study. It's a free study, but they bring you in for 3 days and run a battery of tests on you, about $30,000 worth for free, as long as you stay in the program. And they don't tell you all the data, which is the one downside or gripe I have about it, because they're collecting it across the river in some underground facility, which they might use to make clones of me later, but that's a whole different conversation. But the point is, as you mentioned, grip strength is one of the best indicators of your longevity or how long you're going to live. And so anything people can do to improve the grip strength is going to improve their life. Secondly, gait. They put all these 40 sensors on you, and they measure you walking back and forth and then going over obstacles to kind of measure how you're doing in terms of gait and how that progresses over time. The other couple of things that I learned were walking speed was a very interesting indicator, because how much energy, as people get older, their feet start to widen and they start to walk slower because they're trying to compensate for not as good balance anymore. And so they're like, if you can keep improving your balance and keep the feet pointed forward and walk faster, that's a good indicator that you're doing great health. The other thing was resting metabolic rate. So how low energy do you need to run your body also tells them that you're doing well. And if you're requiring a lot of energy just to keep your body running, not such a good thing. So there were some very interesting things that came out of that. And I came home and I would go to the gym, and the last 5 minutes I would just do some wrist exercises, right? Not even thinking much, but I just just a little bit of wrist. And then 4 weeks later, I'm out there doing my bench press. And I haven't even eaten a good meal. I haven't carved up. I'm just it's Saturday, I'm just going to do some bench, right? And I'm doing my bench, and the first set, I'm just this feels really light. So I pack on some extra pounds. I'm this feels really light. I pack on some more. I'm this is my PR for the last 5 years, and I don't even need a spotter. What's going on? So I'm doing that. I'm maybe I should get a spotter. So I try to go back 10 years in time, and I'm still going. And I go, nothing has changed except for my grip strength. So now I figured out that my rate limiting factor for my bench press was actually my grip strength. You learn crazy things about yourself. So that was very, very interesting to me. Anyway, let's move on. I love the tests that you talked about. There's biological tests. There's telomere tests that you could do. I interviewed Dr. Bill Andrews, who was the scientist that discovered telomerase in humans, not in general, but in humans. Very interesting guy. And I also interviewed Dr. Greg Fay recently, who for the first time reversed human aging by regenerating the thymus gland, which sits under your breastbone, as you know. He used a mixture of three compounds, DHEA, growth hormone, and metformin together to regenerate the thymus in 9 men at least. It was a small study. But he used Dr. Steve Horvitz's epigenetic tests. They used a multiple battery of those tests to see before and after, and they found that aging was or they were going back in age by 2.5 years when the study was done, a year-long study. So that was very interesting. I'm waiting for that to become more widely available to improve immunity, especially in times of the coronavirus where we need that immunity. So that's very interesting. And then lab testing, you talked about, just hypertension, or that's very important to note. And for people that are listening, as Bob mentioned, do it from home if you can, get a simple device to do some of that. And obviously there's also, the blood glucose testing. You can do the HbA1c. There's the CRP, C-reactive protein for inflammation. What other blood tests do you do on the regular, Bob, that people can kind of add that to their basic testing once a year?
I mean, some of the basic panels that you get are good indicators. I mean, a basic panel you'll get your basic cholesterol markers. Now keep in mind the reference ranges they put on those results. You may want to get a second opinion on, because sometimes, like for me, I know like something like LDL might look really like high out of the range, but I have very high HDL, which is a good cholesterol. And then if you're looking at things in context, and triglycerides would be very low, which is you don't want high triglycerides. And so I would look at that and go, well, that's there's formulas that people have run these things through that can create a risk factor for like coronary disease and stuff like that. But I do think even a basic panel, like look at your vitamin D levels, look at that we talked about inflammatory markers, and I like for men. I mean, something like testosterone is a good one. Just we can get there's all these like different panels that we can get into, like thyroid markers and hormones and all that. But I do think just from some basic what you can get from no doctor is going to say I'm not going to test you for this. Like you can go to your doctor, basic panel. These are very common things, and I've noticed things like you tend to see like vitamin D, testosterone, and cholesterol are kind of this triangle. Like they kind of go with each other. So if one gets out of whack, it like knocks the others around. So if someone's trying to boost their testosterone, they have low vitamin D levels, you probably aren't going to boost your testosterone. And vice versa. Like if you're eating such a low, your cholesterol's so low, you're probably not going to. Again, your testosterone levels are probably not going to be. It's going to be much harder to elevate them. And so I just think, we can start looking at basic panels. I mean, then you can go down this sort of rabbit hole of, okay, there's all sorts of different tests for different autoimmunity, and are you trying to uncover food intolerances or sensitivities, or, gut issues, et cetera. So you can go down that, and that can get very expensive. I mean, I did go down that path, but that's not where I started. And, it just comes down to like, there's a lot of testing out there now that people are doing. If you can afford it, it's extra data points, it's extra insights, but at the same time, is it actionable? Is it something that you're going to be able to really, change really quickly? Because I think, early on when some of the, gut testing and microbiome testing has become very popular, but in the early days of it, people would get tested, and then you realize like, okay, I do the test, I get the results back in, let's say 6 weeks. Well, guess what? Your microbiome's probably changed. But since that test, those results you're getting are not accurate. Maybe if you traveled and you ate different food somewhere, and you come back, like it's different. Like that stuff changes all the time. And so I think they've evolved those services now to be more of looking at more of like sort of metabolic kind of health of the body, and using basically pinpointing other stuff in there to like look at kind of the overall system, instead of just saying like what's going on, just microbiome, which is kind of exciting. I think there's been some really good advances over the last few years there. But from regular lab testing, I mean, you can get some basic panels. You'll get all those things we just discussed would be covered in like a basic panel.
Yeah, we need to do a whole different podcast on some of the advanced things you could do because, like you said, there's a rabbit hole on rabbit holes, right? You could go down all these ways, and you could spend thousands and thousands of dollars testing stuff. And to your point, you may not even know what to do with some of that information, right? And it changes so frequently. So I want to come back to something you said, Bob, and vitamin D is something I want to talk about. It's low. A lot of people are on the low end now, and some practitioners tell patients or consumers that having a level of 30 or 25 is okay. Don't worry about it. But the reference range is from 30 to 90, and you should be in the middle of the reference range, not on the low end, right? Um, so how important is vitamin D, and how can we get some more of it?
Well, I mean, we're learning right now how important vitamin D is just based on, when you hear all the medical community coming out saying, what are issues that are affecting a lot of people that are having the worst responses to the sort of COVID situation, and it seems to be a trend of vitamin D status seems to be a common denominator. Even if people aren't necessarily agreeing on the mechanisms of action or whatever, vitamin D is very important. I mean, vitamin D is basically it's a vitamin, but it's a hormone in the body. We use it for a lot of things, and now again, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to give medical advice, but I do know that it's like you said, there's reference ranges out there. Most people are, even if you think at the low end of that reference range is still too low, most people are even below that, and that's just because of our modern lifestyle. We're indoors all day. We're not, because we can get vitamin D, I mean, from several sources, right? You can, certain foods, things like salmon, et cetera, will give you, you can get it from certain food sources. Now, your body can manufacture vitamin D via being exposed to ultraviolet, like the sun. Now, that is one way of producing it. I've done experiments where in the winter, the third way is you could supplement. So there's vitamin D3 supplements, and and there's some dispute. Like people argue whether are all three methods, is that the same sort of form of vitamin D? Is the body going to metabolize it the same way? Versus what shows up on the blood test. Now in the summertime, I am a person who I'm outside a lot in the summer. Even now, like when this was all going down, this whole COVID situation, like I'm out in the sun pretty much an hour, at least an hour a day, more if I can, just that I'm busy working and stuff, but I'm outside, and and it's all about slow and steady. Because one thing I did learn that there's an app called D-Minder that basically tries to estimate your vitamin D levels by, you put in sort of your height and your body size, and then if you're out in the sun, it knows based on your latitude and where you're located, it can estimate and the cloud cover and everything, how much sun you're being exposed to and how much vitamin D you're manufacturing. And so the idea is that when I first started using it a couple of years ago, I was like, well, I was like, I was indoors working all that week, and now it's the weekend. I'm going to go to the beach for the day, and I'm going to be in the sun all day. And it's going to be like, wow, you just made like 30,000 IUs of vitamin D today. And it gives you these little charts that say like, what are your vitamin D levels estimates like for the current week, current month. And what I learned was you can't make up for like the vitamin D. Like it's almost like you got to go slow and steady on it because one big dose of vitamin D, it's gonna say, great, you got a ton of vitamin D today, but your overall trend, your 7-day, 30-day window is not going to be as much. So, and so I think you got I would never tell someone, like, if you're completely pale and you've never been in the sun, to go to the equator and sit in the middle of the sun for 5 hours. That's probably really bad for your skin, really bad, in terms of UV damage and all that. But someone who's sort of built it up over time, you get like moderate exposure. It's, I've also, in terms of burn, like I don't necessarily like burn, and I guess I know not to overstay. I definitely, if I'm playing sports or doing something outside, I'll be out in the sun too long. I'm fortunate in that, like, I won't, even if I get a little bit of redness, it's not like a burn where it's like peeling and red, it just goes away. And, but I do think most people at the very least, they're supplementing some vitamin D to get their levels up, is important. Just just a reality. It's just the reality of, we live in a modern world, and our levels are just overall really, really low.
And this is one I struggle with a lot, actually, Bob. And I know we're low. A lot of people are low because now we're in offices, we're indoor spaces. As hunter gatherers, even 300-400 years ago, maybe we weren't hunter gatherers then, but it was more of the outdoor lifestyle. You woke up, you were out and about, you were tending to the yard, you were building your fence, you were planting a vegetable garden. Now it's just literally you're stuck in a cubicle all day. So I recognize that we're woefully low, or some people may be woefully low in vitamin D, and it's best to get the three sources you talked about, get something from the food, get out, and then supplement as well. Now, when people ask me how long should I be spending, the question I grapple with is, I want you to look good when you're 80. And we know 80, 100, right? I don't want you to look like an alien. And we know that sun, UV light, does damage. UVA and UVB, they go in, they damage our DNA, they break cells, they cause mutations in the cell, which could lead to cancer. There's incidence in skin cancers as well. So there's the approach of you should get sustained vitamin D every day, and don't go crazy, go sit on the beach for 5 hours like a lot of people do, right? They're sitting from noon to 5 p.m. And that is a lot of damage. The sun is very, very strong, right? It's not your friend. I don't believe that even these sunblocks are that effective, because the sun is just unbelievable amounts of energy. So it's getting enough. And the D-Minder app, I think, does give you some indications of how much you should be getting based on where you're located. So that's a good step forward. What I do is I try to alternate what parts of my body I expose to the sun. So some days I'll wear a hat, I'll take my shirt off, or I'll wear shorts and I'll sit out in the sun while I'm covering my face. Other days I don't care. I'm like, whatever, just get enough on my face and my hands and my legs and whatnot. So I don't know that we've come to a good understanding of how much. We know that according to D-Minder, a light-skinned person could sit out in the sun for maybe 15 minutes a day and get a few thousand IUs, but a darker-skinned person has to sit maybe 2 times as much because they can't synthesize vitamin D as quickly. So there's something to do with bio-individuality, but I'm of the opinion that you should alternate what parts of your skin you expose to the sun. Want to minimize the sun damage in the same area over time, so you can look good for a long time, but also you can get enough vitamin D for your vital functions to work. We know that ancestral societies got a lot more sun than we did, but they also died by the time they were 45 or 50. So it's this balance of how do you look good at 100 while getting enough vitamin D not to get diseases and whatnot. So any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a point of a lot of debate, right? When you talk about even just the idea of going in the sun and sunscreen and all that. I mean, I'm not necessarily want to open that can of worms, but I will agree with you from the, as even with my experiences, that sort of slow and steady. And I'll even add to it, another way you can sort of, let's say, hack this whole concept of getting exposure from the sun is go out earlier in the day and a little bit later in the day. There's a window of time, right, where the sun has to be over, I think, 30 degrees for where your body will start producing vitamin D from sun. Don't go out at the high noon if it's like UV index of 11. You probably don't want to spend an hour. That might be the hour you cover up and whatever just from a protective standpoint. But if you get out, maybe you're not going to get you have to stay out a little longer, but it's earlier, but the intensity is a little less. So the risk of overdoing it diminishes because you're saying, I'll go late morning or late afternoon. And that could be another approach to it as well. But I agree. I think, there are people who just naturally, based on, where they're from, can tolerate. I mean, my ancestors are like kind of Mediterranean, it's Italy, kind of that area. And, and you see some people, they've got really like olive, dark skin, they tan very, I can tan pretty easily, but there are people like I'll see, like they're just super tan to where it's like, it's crazy, but almost like, but you could see their skin sometimes like leather, right? It's, they can tan. I can't speculate about, the cancer side of things, but I can just say that it actually, you can see the skin itself is just changed, right? It's just different. And so I I even incorporate, like what I do is if I'm out, if I know it was a long day, if I was in the sun or I overdid it a bit, I have different types of antioxidants and things I can use to help kind of diminish the oxidative stress. That's really what we're dealing with, is the oxidative stress that the UV and stuff is producing on the body. And so, whether it's applying something on the skin, it's like a vitamin C serum or other tools. I also supplement with, do you know PABA? PABA?
Yeah.
It's a para-aminobenzoic acid. I take it as a supplement, just because it helps with skin. But actually, what people find that take it is they stop burning. It actually, and you'll see some sunscreens actually put PABA in it as a way to help prevent sunscreen. But if it's a B vitamin, and it actually, some people, like it's been part of my supplement stack for a couple of years. I mean, I just take I think 500 milligrams a day, and I do it more just as a anti-aging, kind of like it's good for hair and skin and all that kind of stuff. But it also, a side benefit is it seems to help with the body's ability to not from sunburn. So
that's a great point. It is oxidative stress at the end of the day. And so if you can put something on your skin like a vitamin C antioxidant, take PABA. I've also heard astaxanthin has a good response when it comes to going out in the sunlight. So maybe that's something people can look at as well. Okay, I do a couple of things. I go out early, very early, to catch some of the early morning rays. And that I'm doing, and I'm trying to get some in my eyes just to get my body clocks going, if you will. And I'm expecting no vitamin D because, as you said, it's 30 degrees or so that the sun has to be at that altitude. And then I'll go out in the afternoon at 1 or 2, 3 to get some of the UVA and UVB ultraviolet light that can generate, or UVB can generate vitamin D in your body. So, okay. We're coming up on time, so I have just a couple more questions. Do you do anything for your skin? Applying any creams, topicals that help improve the quality of your skin, Bob?
Day to day, I mean, I'll use a little bit of like coconut oil, just rub, things like that. I mentioned some of these, like a vitamin C kind of serum. I largely try to avoid putting a lot of stuff on my body, like even like whether it's shampoo or lotions and all that. I just try to stay hydrated. Really, that's my main thing. I think, like, as long as I'm hydrated, and I don't like the damage, like whatever I'm getting from sun and all that, seems to help. I mean, I'm not trying to think, what have I done product wise? I mean, I probably experimented with some different, creams and lotions and things that, you go to a conference or you run into someone's got a company that's doing something. But again, at the end of the day, it seems like most of them are just doing two things, or either they're helping just moisturizing or they're an antioxidant. So, but I'm sure, there's other things. I know there's some stuff going on with like stem cells and I probably messed around a few times with the micro needling, rolling and all that, just to kind of stimulate. So I'll combine that with like light therapy. So I have like light panels, red. It's like red and near infrared lights.
Like a Juve.
I use a company called Gemba Red. It's less powerful, and it doesn't heat up, so you can be much closer to it, and it has more dialed in, like certain wavelengths that are good. So I'll use that on the skin, and apparently there's even a benefit. Some people have been saying now that if you do the red infrared light first before you go out in the sun, it actually is a nice complementary thing for if you're working on vitamin D, generation and all of that. So so I would say the light, I go more in that direction. I've done cold plunges and cryo and things like that too, like things that kind of get the skin to like really tighten up. That's been my routine.
Okay, great. That's all great. You do work with individuals, correct, as a consultant?
Yeah. So I mean, my background is I'm a co-founder of a company right now that's called Awesome Labs. We're building some of these really cool data-driven tools that make kind of health and wellness accessible to people. I've always worked with consulting and coaching and all that. But whether it's advising companies or being hired as a consultant to help people developing new products, or people come. I don't advertise like one-on-one coaching per se. I don't scale like that, but I have worked with people before. And before COVID, there was actually a biohacking facility here in New York that I had some of my equipment based out of, called Hacks Fitness. So I could, I could train people there as well on certain modalities. So, but yeah, I've worked with people in different capacities. Most of the work's been remote, because it's a lot of it's almost viewing myself as like more of like a data coach. It's like, hey, Bob, I'm trying to accomplish this, and this is what I got going on, and we kind of figure out a plan for that. But I always tell people, like, you're not going to get a result in like in a week or so. You have to stick with the program for a good amount of time, because it's often experimentation. So you might hit a few dead ends on it. Like you might try a few things, and 2 things work, 1 thing doesn't. That's going to happen. That's the whole idea of self-experimentation, is you're going to have to figure out certain things that are going to move the needle and other ones that aren't.
Got it. So if people want to learn more about you, Bob, they could go to quantifybob.com. Are there other social media handles that you want to say out here?
Yeah, you can go on Instagram or Twitter, Quantified Bob, again, Facebook. It's all the same. It's all Quantified Bob. Or you can look me up on LinkedIn and just connect Bob Troia on LinkedIn. And happy to connect there.
Awesome. Bob, thank you so much for coming on the Anti-Aging Hack Show. This has been amazing. And I want to bring you back in a few months, and we'll go much deeper into some of the details of the rabbit holes you've gone into and what you've learned. So thanks for coming.
Thanks again.